Welcome everybody to the daily shiur in Rambam, 3 prokim per day. Some of us remember the dramatic election that took place in America in year 2000. At that time, the intervention of the Supreme Court was needed in order to decide who is the winner. The people who were racing the election those times were George Bush Jr. from the Republicans and Al Gore, he was on the Democratic side. I don't know if you still remember the vice president of Al Gore. The nominee was Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman, he was a religious Jew that after the defeat, which were done by the decision of the Supreme Court, he came home, obviously sad, embarrassed, humiliated. His wife calmed him down. He says, Joe Yosele, at home you always been and you'll always will be just a vice president.
Yeah, that's a good consideration.
And many people at that time, I don't know if they remember, Al Gore was interviewed, and throughout his interview he shared with the public an interesting fact, that he had a part-time job as a Shabbos-GOY for Joe Lieberman. Since Joe Lieberman was already accompanying him for a while in college, in politics, in Washington, and many times he needed to be on Washington and needed to walk and carry some stuff. So he was the full or part-time, sometimes the Shabbos-GOY. He's not the only one. Many great celebrities, I wouldn't be surprised, like Donald Trump, he would be a Shabbos-GOY for the Kushner family. Some rumors that even Vladimir Vladimirovich was also a Shabbos-GOY when he was raised sometimes by his Jewish neighbors at the same apartment building. So I guess the career of a Shabbos-GOY is not that foreign, and maybe it is a prerequisite for high power politicians in the scale of country leaders, or in this case superpowers. Maybe the prerequisite is to start as a Shabbos-GOY. The reason why I'm mentioning, because the first chapter out of the 3 chapters of the daily Rambam deals with the do's and the don'ts about the Shabbos-GOY. I will start with the first sentence of the Rambam of today, which when you will hear this sentence, you will raise your eyebrow and ask the legitimacy or the questionable career of so-called Shabbos-GOY. And I will quote you word by word the opening statement of the first halacha of the first chapter of the daily Rambam of today. And this is exactly how it sounds. It is forbidden to us to say to a non-Jew to do for us a melacha, a forbidden activity on Shabbat. So that is was written. After this sentence, the question is, how is it possible even to have a Shabbos-GOY? So in order to answer, I will share with you another story, an anecdote. Once upon a time here in America, a group of Jewish philanthropist tourists were taken to Israel to visit the Knesset, the other institutions and the establishments, and on their itinerary, on their schedule, they were supposed to go and visit the tombstone of the unknown soldier. So they went to finally, after being in the Wailing Wall and in the Masada and the Hermon and the entire Israel, finally they came to the tombstone of the unknown soldier. And suddenly, one of the tour guides started to share with them the great deeds and the generosity of Bob Rabinovich, who is in this tombstone. And one of the tourists raises his hand and his eyebrows. He says, well, weren't we supposed to visit the unknown, the tombstone of the unknown, and you saying his name, so suddenly he's known? Ah, well, he is unknown as a soldier, but as a pencemaker, as a generous philanthropist, oh, how is he known? Why am I saying it? Because in order to get an idea about, as I said, to the legitimacy and the do's and the don'ts of the Shabbos-GOY that we have just mentioned, let's go and read again this sentence that we have just read. And then we will see not only it is possible, not only it is legit, but many times it is even very important to have. And now let's read again the same text. It is forbidden to ask a non-Jew to do a melacha for us. So first of all, it is forbidden to ask verbally. Nothing is being said about hinting, about giving a hint. So about the idea of hinting, most of the halachic authorities, since the prohibition applies only to verbally say, so to hint it's fine. Another restriction, to do for us a melacha, us strictly. But if he does it for his own benefits, and after he was already doing for himself, we happen to benefit, it's also fine. Then there is another diuk. Diuk is by emphasizing important text. It is forbidden to say to him to make a melacha. Melacha is a generally referencing only to a biblical prohibited activity. Anything that is not biblically prohibited, the prohibition is only miderabanan, doesn't say over here that it is not allowed. A fourth important paying attention to the text. It says in the text, it is forbidden to us to say to a non-Jew to do a melacha for us, for the reason if it will be permitted, Shabbos will be cheapened. Shabbos will be lightly taken by us, not seriously taken by us. So in order to make sure that Shabbos is being taken seriously, for that reason the prohibition was introduced. In other words, if we can somehow create a mechanism that will assure that the value of the Shabbat will still be preserved in our eyes at the same level of importance, it would be okay. Given the fact that right now we read the same text in a very, very careful manner, we're going to see how halacha is really permitting 6 different situations where a request, an open request by a non-Jew to do a melacha for us will be allowed. And now we're going to go one by one. If the non-Jew was doing with his own initiative, for example, if he built for himself a ramp, so after he was building it for himself and he was benefiting, then we can go and walk on the same ramp that he was building for himself. For example, if he was already cutting grass in order to feed his animal, and there is leftovers of the grass, a Jew can go and benefit for this grass, as long as he doesn't know this particular non-Jew, because if he knows, this familiarity may cause to the non-Jew to increase of collection of more grass. There is another situation where it will be permitted, as I said, only activities that are biblically are forbidden to tell to the non-Jew. But if the activity is not biblically forbidden, it is only an added restriction by the Rabbanan, by the rabbinical restriction, that will be fine. Why? Because if there is a need, whether an individual is in a desperate situation, for example, lidvar mitzvah, a person is into a rush to do a mitzvah, it's okay for him to request by a non-Jew to perform a rabbinical forbidden activity, a rabbinical midirabanan. And I'm repeating, the rule in Shabbat is generally any two things that are associated with the Rabbanan. So when it comes at Dvar Mitzvah or Hefsed Mammon or a similar situation, it is okay to ask him to do it. There is another exception where it is allowed to request a non-Jew to perform a activity, and this is one exception that even a biblical activity will be okay. Once in a case of purchasing a land, piece of real estate in Israel, because of Yishuv Haaretz, it's okay to request a non-Jew to prepare the documents in order to finalize the deal because of Yishuv Haaretz. There is a second exception where an individual is finding himself when Shabbos enters and his wallet is in his pocket and he cannot carry it, so then he is allowed to ask a non-Jew to carry his wallet for him. And the reason is given because if I'm not going to give permission to the Jew to ask the non-Jew to carry the wallet for him, since a capital assets, possession of a person is so precious for him, if you're not going to allow him to ask the non-Jew, he may carry it himself. So I rather do something lighter than expose himself to a risk to violate something that is more severe. So these are the 6 different exemptions that are being derivatives from the opening statement that we have just learned, but reread again with more precision, which explains how those careers of Shabbos-GOY became so popular and so useful throughout history and in different places and locations where Jews have been resided throughout the Galut. The second, there is one also a very important note. If an individual happen to ask the non-Jew to perform outside those exceptional permission, and he did it illegally, so the rule is the individual throughout the same Shabbat he is forbidden to benefit from the activity, and after Shabbat he needs to wait the amount of time that the activity is taking place. I'll give you an example. He asks a non-Jew to cook for him. Now, for him only, the non-Jew is not benefiting. For him only, which means it's a forbidden activity for him. So he cannot benefit from this cup of tea on Shabbat. He got to wait until Motzei Shabbat. The amount of time that takes to cook that particular dish, and only then. The reason, at the moment yet you're going to penalize him he will realize that he has nothing to gain by violating and conducting a forbidden activity. So that's the summary, that when and when not it is allowed to use a Shabbos-GOY. So as I said before, anything that is rabbinical, that is done for an important purpose, it is permitted. Anything that the non-Jew itself benefit is also permitted. Anything that may lead to a possibility that the Jew will make a bigger violation, it is also permitted. There is another aspect that is being dealt in this particular chapter, different partnerships or contracting a non-Jew to do a job for you. So the moment that the job is being done by contract, or the payment is not specified to Shabbos only, it's a payment that is being paid for the entire year, it is also permitted, given the fact that there is no specific benefit of the Shabbat itself. However, it is subject to certain jobs, especially construction jobs that is being done in the city itself. So this may have some restriction, because people may not differentiate whether the connection between you and the non-Jew is on a contractual basis or it is employee-employer relationship. But that's the general guidelines and principles that are covering both the usage for a non-Jew to do any activity on Shabbat, partnership, contract, or employee-employment relationship. That's on a nutshell. The second and the third chapter of today are entering those activities, the biblical 39 melachot. Melachot is jobs that are forbidden to do on Shabbat. How they reach the amount of 39? While they were constructing the Mishkan, the tabernacle. The word melacha in the Torah appears twice, appears in connection to not to do any work, and the reference to work in connection of Shabbat appears in the word melacha, and also the same word melacha appears in connection of the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. So Chachamim have derived that in order to define what type of an activity is forbidden, you have to go through the process of constructing the Mishkan, and then you'll figure out all those activities that are forbidden. The general divisions of those 39 melachot are being departmentized into 4 areas. Area of food preparation, garment preparation, house building, and preparation of documents the old-fashioned way. Because the old-fashioned way, how documents were prepared by a parchment. And in order to have a parchment, you gotta have skin. In order to gotta have skin, you gotta hunt. And after the hunting, you gotta slaughter. And after the slaughter, you gotta take off the skin. And after taking off the skin, you gotta salt it. You gotta process it. So by taking the entire process of preparing the skin, that's how you getting, in addition to the food department, garment department, and housing department, so you're covering all the 39 melachot. I'll try to cover some of them, because to go through the entire 39 melachot there is no time, but I'm gonna zoom on 2 principles. Principle number 1, that each and every one of those activities that actually took place in the Mishkan, they are called Av Melacha. Av in Hebrew means a father. They are the fathers, they are the original prototype models that teach us what a melacha is. The Rambam, his own opinion, that not only those activities that actually took place in the Mishkan are forbidden, but also any similar activities that are similar or in the functionality of the activity or the purpose. If it matches both the functionality and the purpose, it will also be going to be considered as a av melacha. However, if it's lacking one of them, if it's only similar with the function, or it is only similar with the purpose, then it will be considered not a av, but tolda. Tolda is an offspring. Example. According to the Rambam, when we saying that there is the idea of choresh, the first activity that starts with the food processing is the activity of plowing. So not only plowing, but also if an individual digging or scratching intentionally the earth, he is violating the av melacha of melechet choresh. If there is something that is only tolada, for example, he gives an example when an individual, the original melacha in Mishkan was grinding the grains, grinding the wheat of the samemanim. An individual takes a vegetable and grinds it very, very thinly for the purpose of cooking. That's also similar to what is being done in the Mishkan, but it's not exactly the same activity. Now, what is the difference between Av and Tulda? The only difference, both of them have the same level of severity, they're both of them biblical severity. The only difference, if an individual happened to perform 39 different avot, different fathers of melacha, so then if he has done it unintentionally, he needs to bring 39 korbanot, although he was doing it behe'elem echad. He'elem is with one forgetfulness. He forgot about them at all, he forgot that today is Shabbat, but if he has performed 39 different activities, he must to bring 39 different korbanot, offerings, korban chatat. If an individual made one av and many of the same tuladot, all what he will bring is one korban. So the amount of the korbanot, of the offerings a person needs to bring in case he violated unknowingly this violation, that's what makes the difference between an av, between a father, between a principle of a forbidden activity, and a tulda is the offspring of a forbidden activity. I want to make two interesting notes that they are related to this concept. And many people will ask, why the Mishkan? What is the connection between the Mishkan? So first of all, the primary purpose of an individual is to turn his own personality into a Mishkan, into a tabernacle for the presence of the holy Shekhinah, of the holy godliness. In fact, everybody knows there is a pasuk, a verse in books of Psalms, Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh Ohel Shiken Ba'adam. When Almighty deserted the Mishkan, the tent of Shiloh, which was a temporary temple, Ohel, the tent, Shiken Ba'adam. He found a parking to have the Shekhinah resting inside the soul of the Adam. But further than this, one of the greatest halachic authorities of all time, known as the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlish, who made the Mapa on the Shulchan Aruch and other important halachic writings, he edited and wrote a book called Torat Ha'olah. In the book Torat Ha'olah, he is basically drawing similarities between the structure of the Mishkan, external and internal design of the Mishkan, and the external design of the world and the internal design of the person, how perfectly there is such a correlation and such a match between them. I would like to conclude also with an interesting episode that was, in fact, it is recorded, it is even a letter that the Rebbe responds to a question that someone have raised, that he see some logic in the olden days where each and every activity was associated with so much work and effort and sweat, where much technology and machinery was not as developed as today. So makes sense that those activities were forbidden. But today, in a switch of you can turn on and off and run entire operation that is literally effortless, doesn't require any effort in order to perform. Does it make sense still to preserve the Shabbat? And the answer that was given by the Rebbe, given the fact that in the Ten Commandments there is a straight link between the observance of Shabbat and creation of heaven and earth by God Almighty. And creation of heaven and earth by God Almighty is way more effortless, because the Torah refers to creation as utterances. Diburim, Vayomer, and God said, Yehi Or, Yehi Rakia. All those 10 utterances that the world was created with were way more effortless than we can ever imagine, and yet from this effort God Almighty have rested. How much more so that a definition of work is not being measured by the effort, sweat and blood a person really invests in that particular activity, but it must be defined only to very precise parameters that are derivatives from the activity in the Mishkan. And those activities, they have one common thread, and the thread that goes through and through all of them is a creation. Each and every activity is a new creation. When a person plants a seed in the ground, in the soil, a new life comes into being, a process of something new. When a person digs a hole, there is a new reality, a creative reality that is being done. If we'll go each and every activity that goes through the entire Lametet Melachot 39 biblical forbidden activities, the common thread in all of them, when a person cuts a grain or ripped fruit, a new reality comes into being. From a connected fruit to its root, it stopped to be connected. When a person even takes a grain and grinds it, a new reality. When a person takes the flour and mixes with water and kneading it, and there is a dough, it's a new reality. When he bakes it, again, a new reality. And so on and so forth. When we're going at the process of threshing. Threshing is the idea of dash. It expands way beyond just threshing. For example, the idea of taking milk out of a cow is also being chayav, being committed, being violated the melacha of dash. When a person gives to another, when a person gives a wound to another individual, so the process of the wound that is being created is also a melacha of dash, mefarek, threshing. So what we were speaking before, that each and every activity of those forbidden biblical activities, the nekuda, the intrinsic idea that goes through them all, is a creative activity that brings a new reality. For that reason, the final forbidden melacha that the Rambam counts, which happened to be the first melacha that in the Talmud counts, the Talmud opens up the tractate of Shabbat with the melacha of Hotza'ah and Achnasa, taking out from one domain to another domain. So the Rambam counts this particular melacha as the final melacha, while in the Talmud, in the Shas, it's being introduced at the beginning of the tractate. And the reason is because it's called melacha gru'ah. Each and every one of those activities, it is quite visible, it is quite tangible how this activity creates a new reality. The only hard thing to come around and to sense how the fact that you are moving an object from one domain while the object remains the same shape, it will still be considered an activity. So one of the commentators are coming with a very interesting creative idea to explain the creativity in the melacha, in the activity of moving an object from one domain into another domain. And where is the creative activity? When an individual takes an object that right now was part of this domain and he takes it to another domain, so there is a deficiency in the previous domain, a deficiency of this object that previously was there, and there is a surplus in the new domain that this same object right now became a part of the new domain. So we see how even when it comes to melacha gu'ah, to so-called inferior type of activity, even then there is an element of a chidush, of something new, a new reality that comes into being. This is in a nutshell. It's one of the, as I said, one of the most complex, wide. There is an ocean of materials on Shabbat, literally libraries of tens of thousands of books. Literally, there is that covering these materials. But again, there is no way to cover. All I'm trying over here is to introduce the primary principles and to try to simplify them as much as possible. The third chapter deals with the so-called shiurim. Shiurim is the amount that is required, the quantitative amount that is required for an individual to commit the forbidden activity on Shabbat. For example, when a person is about to plant, and by the way, planting is not only planting. Sometimes when an individual trims a tree, he will be violating not only trimming, but also planting. Because what is the idea many times of trimming is in order to speed up the process of growth. So even in Shabbat itself, we'll see the idea of not only what at seemingly at first glance, but when you're digging deeper, you see that some activities are more complex, which one type of activity can include two. And for example, sometimes can be also a very interesting activity. A person can do the same activity, but depends from which direction he does it. If an individual, for example, takes a grass that is growing on a barrel and he puts it on the ground, he will be performing the activity of planting, if he takes out from the ground and he places it back on the barrel, so then he makes the activity of uprooting. What is the difference? The difference, in order to violate the activity of planting, is b'mashehu. Mashehu, which means there is no minimum amount. Even nothing, even a fraction, is already sufficient for him to be a criminal and to violate the melacha on Shabbat. On the other hand, when a person cuts something, since generally whatever he cuts is for the purpose of eating, so a shi'ur, a certain measurement, a minimum measurement of eating must be met. What is the minimum amount of eating? Is kegrogeret. Grogeret is a third of an egg. It's approximately, I would say, about 20 grams of today. So that's the general minimum amount that is required for an individual to be liable for the activity of chopping and collecting type of food from the ground, or any type of the food related activities that we mentioned before. Now, when we're talking about measurement, it's also a very important distinction whether the food is designed for him or whether the food is collected to feed his animals. If it's designed for him, he will be liable even for a measurement as a grogeret. If it is designed in order to feed an animal, so it needs to be a mouthful of a gdi of an animal. A gdi is a lamb. That's the amount that is required. If he is collecting trees in order to make a bonfire, to cook a dish, so the minimum amount requires sufficient amount of woods that will be sufficient to cook one egg only. At the moment that he collected this amount of woods, boom, he will be liable for Shabbat. So if we will summarize the three subjects that we'll have covered today, the first chapter dealt with the issue, the ins and out of hiring or volunteering as a Shabbos-GOY. The second one, we covers the primary principles and the differences between Avot and Tuldot of the 39 activities. We have departmentized them into 4 sections. The first section is the activities that starting from the preparation of food, preparation of garment and clothes, preparation and designing and destroying a houses. So let's make it food, garment and housing. The fourth section is preparation of document old style. What is preparation of document old style? As I said, parchment. So throughout the preparation of parchment, there is a slaughter, there is a peeling of the skin, processing the skin, salting the skin, writing, erasing, preparing the lines, and so on. It's all document preparation. And the final melacha, as I call it, melacha gru'a, is the carrying in and out from one domain to another domain, or as later we will see that this itself is a very, very wide subject. We'll cover it Be'ezrat Hashem in the next shiurim. Thank you very, very much, and good night.
And the question, is there room for mental effort?